Everyone, today we're going to be looking at adding and subtracting fractions as well as some improper fractions and mixed numbers. Now we're going to start off with adding with like denominators because it's a lot simpler than what we're going to do later on down the track. So we're going to work our way up in difficulty. Now, when we're adding fractions together, sometimes you can see them visually, and it does help when you can see them visually. Now here I've got 3/8 and we're going to add on 2/8. Okay, so I'm going to start by shading in the 3/8. All right. And now because these pieces are all the same size, I can just add on the 2/8. And we can see that here I've got a total of 5/8. Now you might have already noticed, but all that was adding the numerators together, and then that denominator stays the same because the size of the pieces didn't change. Okay. Now, same idea when we're subtracting with the same denominator. I'm going to start by shading in my 7/9. Okay, so 7 blocks out of these 9. And then I'm going to be taking away 4. So I'm going to erase 4 of these. And you can see that what we're left with is 3/9. Now, hopefully you were paying attention in the equivalent fractions lesson and you would simplify this down by dividing both numerator and denominator by 3. And we would get 1/3. But once again, for this answer here, the numerator changed, but the denominator stayed the same. And that's something to keep in mind, okay? Now, feel free to pause here and have a go yourself, but I'll quickly go through these, okay? Now, I am really going to emphasize this. When you add and subtract fractions with the same denominator, that denominator does not change because the size of the pieces does not change, okay? So if I've got 2/7 and I add on 3/7, I'm going to end up with 5/7, okay? If I've got 11/12 and I take 6 of them away, I'll end up with 5/12. If I've got 15/9, even though that's improper, we can work with it. If I've got 15/9 and I take away 6 of them, I end up with 9/9, which is the same as just 1 whole. Now, 12/14 plus 3/14, I'm going to end up with 15/14, or if we don't specify, you don't have to do this, but you can make that 1 and 1/14. You can change it into a mixed number. Now we're going to look at what we do when we don't have the same denominator. It's a little bit trickier, but there is a very neat trick to go with it, okay? And it will require your equivalent fraction work. Now I've got 1/3 plus 1/6 here. We can see the denominators are different, but I'm going to start by shading in that 1/3 anyway. Okay, now some of you might have already figured out what to do, but this is where I'm going to start. All right, we're going to shade in that 1/3. Now, my problem here is I can't add on a 6 because this is currently in thirds. But remember from our equivalent fraction work earlier, I can change these pieces, the 3 pieces, into 6 pieces by splitting each one in half. So now instead of having 1/3 plus 1/6, I've actually got 2/6 plus 1/6. So I'm going to add that 1/6 on, which means that I've got 3/6, which is equal to 1/2, okay? So what we have to do is make equivalent fractions with the same denominator, okay? Because remember that denominator doesn't change. All right, so even though I changed the size of the pieces, I did it so that we could have the same size pieces, okay? The same rule applies when you're subtracting. All right, I've got 7/9 and I'm going to take away 2/3. So I've got my 7/9 here, okay? I have to figure out what 2/3 is using the same denominator, okay? If I times both of these by 3, I'm going to end up with 7/9, take away 6/9, okay? So if I'm going to get rid of 6/9 here, that means I end up with 1/9. Now, sometimes it's not always going to work out that nicely where you're only multiplying the one fraction. Sometimes you're going to have to find the lowest common denominator of both fractions. Okay, we're going to have some examples of that on the next slide. So this first one here, you could do using our little diagram method, all right? But our lowest common multiple or denominator in this case, I'll change it to a D, is going to be 14, okay? To get that, I'm going to times the 7 and the 3 by 2. So I end up with 2 14ths plus 6 14ths, okay? That is equal to 8 14ths. And now remembering from our equivalent fraction lesson, if I divide both of those by 2, I'm going to end up with 4 over 7, okay? For this next one here, our lowest common denominator is going to be 16, which means that I'm going to have to times the numerator and denominator on this second fraction by 8. So I've got 11 16ths, take away 8 16ths, which is equal to 3 16ths. This one here, my lowest common denominator is 9. So I'm going to multiply the numerator and denominator on the second fraction by 3. So I've got 5 ninths take 3 ninths, which is equal to 2 ninths. Okay. Last but not least, this lowest common denominator is also 16. If I times that first fraction's denominator and numerator by 4, I end up with 12 16ths plus 1 16th, which is equal to 13 16ths. All right, last but not least, we're going to look at adding and subtracting mixed numbers and improper fractions. So because we now know how to go between improper fractions and mixed numbers, you should also be able to add and subtract them, okay? So adding is easy. You've got two options. So our first option is to convert a mixed number into an improper fraction and add them together, or we can consider these as the wholes and the fraction parts, okay? Now for this first one, that's going to be the easier option. All right, we've got 1 whole and 3/5. So that's the same as saying 1 plus 3/5 plus 2 plus 2/3. And that way you're separating the whole number from the fraction part for now. That means we're left with 3 plus 3/5 plus 2/3. And then we have to figure out what our lowest common denominator is, okay? Now 5 and 3, their lowest common denominator is going to be 15, okay? Which means we need to make both of these fractions have denominators of 15. For this first one, that means multiplying by 3. And for that second one, that means multiplying by 5. So what we're left with now is 3 plus 9 15ths plus 10 15ths, okay? That's going to give us 3 plus 19 over 15. Now, if we have a mixed number, we can't have a whole number and then an improper fraction. Okay, so your choice here is either to make it improper or to make it mixed. I always find it easier to make it improper from the beginning so that we don't run into this problem. Okay, but that completely lies on you guys. Now, 19 over 15, 15 will go into 19 once. So we're going to have 4 wholes. And then we've got that remainder of 4, okay? Now, for this second one, I'm going to bite the bullet and make that 1 2/4 into an improper fraction, okay? What we've got there then is we've got 11 over 7 plus, and now remember it's going to be 1 times 4 plus 2, so that's going to be 6 over 4. And their lowest common denominator is going to be 28. So to get there, I'm going to multiply the numerator and denominator of the fraction by 4 and that second one by 7. So I'm going to end up with 44 over 28 and 42 over 28. Okay, seeing that those denominators are the same. Now 44 plus 42, that's going to give me 86 over 28. And I'm going to simplify further by dividing both of these by 2. So that means we're going to end up with 43 over 14. Now you can make this mixed if you like, okay, but you do not have to. If it was to be mixed though, the answer would be 3 and 1/14 if that's the route that you went down. Now when it comes to subtracting, I highly recommend that you make them improper. Sometimes it's going to be annoying, however, people forget that when you have a subtraction here, that it's actually going to be -1 minus 5 on 8. Okay, they always forget about that minus there. All right, so it's a lot easier if you just make them improper straight away. All right, for this first one, making them improper, we're going to have 2 times 4 plus 3, which is 11 over 4. And then 1 times 8 plus 5 is 13 over 8. Now, this lowest common denominator is going to be 8. So I'm going to multiply the numerator and denominator on the first fraction by 2. So I have 22 over 8 minus 13 over 8, which will give me 9 over 8. Or if you went down the mixed number path, it'll be 1 and 1/8. Okay? Lucky last problem for today. 34 over 9 is already improper. So I'm going to change 1 and 1/6 into an improper fraction, and that's going to be 7 over 6. The lowest common denominator we have here is 18, and I'm going to multiply 9 and 34 by 2, and 7 and 6 by 3. That means we end up here with 68 over 18 minus 21 over 18. Now you do get bigger numbers when you work with improper fractions. It'll be a tad bit annoying, but it does make life easier later on down the track when you get to this point here, okay? 68 minus 21 will be 47, and that denominator will stay the same.